So we're talking today about belief, believing. And I want to start with two questions. How would you behave if it was true? If everything we believe in was true, how would you behave? And why don't you behave that way? I want to share two stories as well. So within the last couple of weeks, I've seen a Facebook post. I think it must have been timed for Father's Day. It was a collection of text messages, and it was recognising fathers and their contributions to the life of their children. And there was one that I particularly remember, and it was a girl who, I don't know the circumstances, but she was obviously very nervous. She was very unsure about something that was coming up. I guess it might have been an exam, or it might have been a job interview or something of that nature. And she received a text message from her father, and it said this: "You spent 8 years believing in the Easter Bunny. All I'm asking is that you believe in yourself for 10 seconds. The second story is one about myself. 7 years ago, I visited the doctor. And during that appointment, my doctor sat me down and told me I needed to lose 10 kilograms and I needed to lose 10 centimetres from my waist. My family has a history of diabetes. And so she said if I didn't do that, or if I indeed increased my weight, I was very likely to be staring down that barrel very soon. Now, I've seen what is required of my father, who does suffer from type 2 diabetes, and the thing that gets me is the finger prick test that has to happen twice a day. And I thought, it's just something I don't want to do. So I decided, well, I needed to follow the doctor's advice, and she told me I needed to get my heart rate to 105 or above for 30 to 40 minutes, 4 or 5 days a week. Over the course of about a year, I managed to lose that 10 kilograms. And I did it by riding to work. And Pam and I, for 5 or 6 years, have cycled to work. And that's been what helped me lose weight. Now, of course, in our current circumstances, we're not riding to work because work is at home for both of us. And we, like many others, have gained weight, I guess, because we're not getting that regular exercise. And it's very difficult for us to get out and get the exercise that we need. Now, you would think, wouldn't you, knowing everything that Doctor told me, that I would behave in ways that would ensure that I don't put that weight on. And yet I still find it very difficult to behave in a way which is coherent with the understanding that my doctor gave me. So, how would I believe if it was true? And why don't I? What do we mean when we say believe? There's that very famous passage in John's Gospel, John chapter 3, verse 16. If you speak to an evangelical, they'll tell you it's the most famous Bible passage in the Bible. For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him should not perish, but have eternal life. Now, this idea of believing is quite an important theme for the Gospel of John, and I want to just illustrate that for you. So the word believe occurs 229 times in the New Testament as a whole. 9 times in the Gospel of Matthew, 15 in the Gospel of Mark, 10 in the Gospel of Luke, and 86 times in the Gospel of John. Now get that, 86 times. That's a third of the occurrences of the entire New Testament in John's Gospel alone. However, there's another word that we use which means something quite similar, and it is faith. Now, faith occurs in the New Testament 304 times. In Matthew, 17 times. In Mark, 7. In Luke, 19. And in John, not once. It's quite interesting. Now, why is that? Well, The Greek word for belief and faith is actually very similar. The difference between them is that believe is a verb and faith is a noun. Now, when we speak about faith and when we talk about this thing, belief, as a noun, we imagine, I suppose, a collection of things. It's as though we collect information, we collect facts and we gather them together and we hold them in our mind. And that's what we imagine, I think, when we talk about faith. But believing is something you must do. It is an active word. And it's interesting to me that John's Gospel speaks entirely in terms of the verb, the thing you must do, rather than the thing that you can hold or possess. I will also talk about another word which is related again to them, and that is the adjective, which is faithful. And that's just worth hanging on to because that's got a very different slant to it than just faith, to be faithful. Now, when we talk about John chapter 6 and what we heard Pam reading, she read for us just the very tail end of what is quite a long chapter. John chapter 6 begins with the feeding of the 5,000. It's the miracle that occurs in all four of the Gospels. Following on immediately from that is the story of Jesus walking on the water. And then beyond that, there is a long discussion that takes place between Jesus and what is a diminishing crowd. So Jesus has fed the 5,000, and then he's essentially disappeared as far as everybody is concerned, and they go looking for him, and they find him on the other side of the lake after he has walked on the water. And this is part of the conversation that goes on. So the crowd say to Jesus, "What shall we do that we may work the works of God?" And Jesus says, "This is the work of God, that you believe in him whom he sent." And the crowd respond, "What sign will you perform then, that we may see it and believe you? What work will you do?" See, Jesus is telling the crowd they need to believe. But the crowd is saying to Jesus, well, that's really your responsibility. You've got to convince us in some way. Give us something that we can believe in. What you need to note is that Jesus has already given them a sign. If we're talking about this crowd, they've already been fed. They've already seen the way that Jesus has multiplied a small amount of food and fed a large crowd of people. He really doesn't need to provide any more signs than he has, and yet they're seeking a sign. Let's go back to my stories that I shared earlier on this morning. The father who urges his daughter to believe in herself. Whose work is it in that instance to believe? It's interesting, isn't it, that we have such a hard time believing in ourselves, and yet when it comes to God, we demand that God do something to make us believe in him. When I talk about my own journey, my meeting with my doctor, whose job is it to believe? Is it the doctor's to convince me that I need to lose the weight? No, it's mine. The doctor has told me everything she needs to. It's then my job to go and carry it out, to actually do something about it. She can't get on the treadmill or she can't get on the bicycle for me. I actually have to do it. So belief is something that we must do. It's not just an intellectual exercise, and it's not just kind of amassing facts or knowledge or being witness to things going on. It's something that we must do of ourselves, and it requires, obviously, energy and effort on our own part, even to do something as simple as believe in ourselves. Merely knowing something that belongs to faith is an activity of memory, which does not involve any assent of the rational. Acknowledging that which belongs to faith is in itself a rational assent brought about by certain causes and for the sake of certain ends. But having faith is an activity of conscience, that is, of the Lord working through conscience. It requires something of us. In Hebrews chapter 10, the author writes this: "For if we sin willfully, after we have received the knowledge of the truth, there no longer remains a sacrifice for sins, but a certain fearful expectation of judgment and fiery indignation which will devour the adversaries." And he continues on talking about the law of Moses. "Anyone who has rejected Moses' law dies without mercy on the testimony of 2 or 3 witnesses." That's what the Old Testament law says. And then he goes on, "Of how much worse punishment do you suppose will he be thought worthy who has trampled the Son of God underfoot, counting the blood of the covenant by which he was sanctified a common thing, and insulted the Spirit of grace?" When people say that those are saved who have faith, they are saying something true. But in the word, nothing else is meant by faith than love to the Lord and charity towards the neighbour, and so a life that is derived from these loves. Matters of doctrine and established beliefs do not constitute faith, yet are part of faith. For these, each and every one, exists to the end that a person may become such as they teach. Now, as you read through John's Gospel, and John chapter 6 in particular, what you will notice is there is a gradual falling away from Jesus. So we begin that chapter with 5,000 people being fed. Now, we've no idea how many of those people actually sought to follow Jesus and find him after he disappeared. But we can imagine it was a substantial number. But as we listen to the conversation which takes place between Jesus and the crowd, there is this gradual diminishing of the crowd as more and more people leave him because they find what he says too difficult to understand. It's the same is true of us in that it is very easy when we see some great wonder or miracle, it's very easy for us to believe. But that's not the belief that will get us into heaven. That's not the belief that saves us. You see, that easy belief, that external one that sees a sign and just marvels at the wonder of it, is superficial, it's surface level, and we so easily forget it. In the same way that, I might easily leave my doctor's surgery. She's told me the bad news. I need to get on my bike and do my exercise. But as time passes, my motivation diminishes. And I need to put in some effort, even just to remember that lesson that she shared with me and that need that she shared. You see, a real faith and real charity doesn't make actually a demand upon God. It makes a demand upon us. It doesn't make a demand on others to behave towards us in a certain way. It demands something of us first. The author M. Scott Peck talked about stress, and he calls stress the test of goodness. You see, it's not when life is easy, and it's not when faith is obvious that we see real faith. It's when life is hard. It's when we have no external sign of what we should believe in, that we have to do the work, and it is our capacity to do that work which demonstrates that faith. It's when people treat us badly that we see true charity emerge. And that lesson is a bitter pill to swallow. And many, many people abandon the gospel on the way because of it. We get to the end of the chapter, and Peter makes that beautiful proclamation and that confession. He says, "Lord, to whom shall we go? You have the words of eternal life. Also we have come to believe and know that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God. So this week, I'm going to ask you to reflect on my two questions. How would you behave if it is true? And why don't you? I want to just go back briefly to remind you of what I shared with you when we had our offering this morning. A true worship of God has its origin in things of the Word and not at all in those of self-intelligence. You see, our worship of the Lord springs from what is of the Lord within us. It doesn't spring from we ourselves. We are kind of like a vessel which contains it. And it is the contents which worships the Lord truly, not the vessel itself. And this is why it's so important for us, I think, to examine our own behaviour, because when we are working from the vessel, when we're working from us, we so often fail. But the Lord doesn't hold it against us. The Lord merely asks us to be that vessel, to hold what is of Him in our lives and to act out of that rather than act out of the vessel that tends to be us, that comes from us. So friends, I'll ask you just to, as I say, contemplate those two questions. How would I behave if it were all true? And why don't I?